Welcome back, everyone. One question that I never got, but I want to talk about anyway, is pretty much the weirdest iPhone I've ever owned. Now, what does this mean? Well, essentially, an iPhone, for example, I started with the 6 Plus. It was a transition coming from my G2 to an iPhone 6 Plus, but I loved it. I then went to a 6S Plus. I loved that as well. But the next phone I upgraded to was actually a little bit of a weird experience, and I would say it was probably one of the weirdest iPhones I've ever owned, both when I was using it and after I used it. So it wasn't really a bad experience, my 7 Plus, I still say was, I think, one of my favorite iPhones I've ever owned, right probably behind my iPhone 10 and 11 Pro. But it was definitely an interesting thing that Apple did at the time. So the very first thing, the thing that really freaked me out the most when I first used it was actually that the home button didn't click in. It was actually a vibration motor, very similar to the Magic trackpads or the MacBook trackpads with the, vibration motor. It didn't click in. And with the 6S Plus, that actually was the case. The 7 Plus didn't have that, and I always found that very funny. And this actually ended up being kind of a worse thing than not, because if you ever wanted to replace the display from a non-Apple verified person, like if you wanted to do it yourself, well, the home button would not work, and I don't even think Touch ID worked afterwards either. Before, you could still, use the home button without Touch ID. Now, you couldn't even use the home button. You had to have assistive touch on every single time, and that really threw me off. I really didn't like that. On top of that, this was the first iPhone or first phone I've ever owned without a headphone jack, which really threw me off as well, and I wasn't 100% too much of a fan of that at the time. I guess we've all gotten used to it, but there are still times where I'm like, man, I wish I had a headphone jack on this phone. And it all started with the 7 Plus, and I think a lot more people are probably upset about it now than then, but it is what it is. We can't go back and put a headphone jack on our phone. Now, another thing that really threw me off about the iPhone 7 Plus was the specific model that I had, which was the jet black version, which by far is one of my favorite designed iPhones of all time. It looks so beautiful. I wish Apple were to bring it back, because I think a lot of people would buy it. But surprisingly, there was an issue with these phones, with any jet black model of a device. My G2 had it as well, kind of, where these watermarks would just come up on the, around the whole entire device. So these watermarks are literally just like white specks that pretty much can't rub off. I think if you tried really hard, you may be able to scrape them off, but it wasn't like, a huge deal, but it was something that really threw me off. If you even look at a lot of other phones, like my 12 Pro, for example, also has this issue on the bezel around it, but not the whole entire phone. Like, it's not on the back. And my 11 Pro had it as well. And this phone, I think, stemmed it all. I think before this, maybe like the 3GSs had it back in the day. But that was another thing that really threw me off. My 6S Plus obviously didn't have it, but it was something that threw me off. And finally, the dual camera setup of this thing was awesome. I loved it. I just never really found use for it at that time, which is so crazy. I would always not use that telephoto lens, but to be honest, that's like one of the main lenses I use now. So I think it was a good phone. So that was when I used it. But surprisingly, there were some issues after I used it. If you guys remember, I made all those videos like from iOS 11 to like even now with iOS 15. I would talk vocally about any issue I had on any phone. And the 7 Plus, I did have a few issues with. There were some times where my 7 Plus would boot loop and factory reset on my, when I was upgrading it for the one version to the other. And that was very annoying. The 7 did the same thing. And I said at one point, this is the phone I would probably least recommend to people. I think since iOS 14 and on the later half of iOS 13, it's been a pretty smooth ride. So I don't know what Apple did to make this huge switch, but that was something that really threw me off as well. So I think ultimately the 7 Plus is a great phone. I think it probably meant a lot to Apple and even to us, people who owned it. I don't know if it was perfect, but I would say it's probably one of the weirdest iPhones I've ever owned in my opinion. So that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.